East Texans packed a meeting room today and hundreds more were in the hallway. Good evening and thank you for being with us. Most of the people were there to find a proposal to pump billions of gallons of water from an East Texas aquifer.
I didn't think that I was signing up for some people to come steal my survivability.
This is video from today's meeting of the Natchez and Trinity Valley's Water Conservation District in Jacksonville, where the hot topic was proposals filed by two companies for wells in several East Texas counties. Wells that would pump billions of gallons of water from the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer. Among those there today, some state lawmakers, State Reps Trent Ashby of Lufkin and Cody Harris of Palestine.
It is of such great state importance that the legislature should weigh in on whether or not one property owner should be able to export 30,000 acre-feet of water to another area. I don't think that's ever what the legislature has ever intended.
Representative Harris has scheduled a public hearing at the state capitol in Austin for July 15th to get answers. Since the applications were filed, a number of East Texas cities and counties have made it clear they are against the proposal, with some asking for a limit on the amount of water that would be pulled from the aquifer. Happening right